Story 1. Decision fatigue, combined with some great radio stations in the area, affects me. I do not always do this, but when I am driving to the grocery store and not taking a long trip, I put on the radio and do not even plug in my phone. Story 2. It's free. I have almost an hour in the car every day. I have my favorite programs and music. Story 3. I am not streaming when I use the radio. Local radio includes local news and updates. Story 4. The radio is free and does not drain my phone's battery when streaming data. Story 5. Old car, local news, and weather updates. I like the radio DJs in my area. It is free too. Story 6. It just works. No internet connection is required. You do not need to be close to a speaker for it to operate. It does not consume excess phone battery when using Bluetooth. You do not need to worry about upsetting coworkers when a phone call mutes the music. There is no need to argue over which playlist is played. You do not need to worry about offensive music playing when clients or coworkers are present. There is no concern if the inexpensive frequency modulation radio is damaged on the job site. Story 7. Sometimes I can't be bothered to think about what music to play, or I have exhausted all my usual songs. Story 8. I love not knowing what comes next. I still stream sometimes, though. Story 9. As someone who works for a radio station, thank you all. Story 10. I do not feel like setting up a streaming service in the car and dealing with my phone when I can just turn the ignition and the radio comes on automatically. Story 11. British Broadcasting Corporation Radio 6 music is fantastic for discovering new music and enjoying some great classics. Mary Ann Hobbs is the queen of the airwaves. I love her. She has the greatest, most eclectic taste. Story 12. Does not require an internet connection and provides random songs you may have forgotten. Story 13. It is free, and I do not have to do anything. This may surprise some people, but I appreciate the local advertisements. I learn about special events and businesses that may be useful to me. Story 14. Radio is free, which saves money. Money in my pocket is far better than money in someone else's pocket. Story 15. It's free and includes elements such as conversations, humor, human connection, and news. I'm not putting money in the pockets of companies that hate the very people they are supposed to represent. Story 16. Sometimes it's nice to hear real local disc jockeys. Streaming services are so sterile. Not everything has to be corporatized. Story 17. I use them to listen to college radio and discover new music. Both stations stream online. WMBR 88.1 Massachusetts Institute of Technology Radio. WZBC 90.3 Boston College Radio. Story 18. I do not have to pay a monthly subscription for it. Story 19. Radio is more random. If I listen to a Spotify artist, the service repeats songs in the same order. I do not know if other services are better, but that has been my experience. In my area, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation Radio 2 plays some chill early morning music. I sometimes listen to National Public Radio. Story 20. My work van has a camera, so when the podcast I am listening to ends, I cannot start something else until I park. I usually press the radio button so I do not have to listen to silence. Story 21. The kids will fight over what music to listen to, but if the radio is on, we do not have to choose and can enjoy a bit of peace. Story 22. Sometimes I just want the decision-making taken out of my hands, and I like feeling connected to the world around me. Story 23. I listen to the radio when I am in town running errands and expect to be in and out of the vehicle a few times. I only listen to news from the major networks on those days. The American Broadcasting Company, the National Broadcasting Company, the Columbia Broadcasting System, and the Associated Press. Story 24. I listen in my car. It is free and gives me local weather and traffic. Story 25. I might be a weird case. Streaming is great for playing an album front to back or for listening to a selected set of songs. It is also very impersonal. Radio is free and feels more connected because a human usually curates or broadcasts it. But unless it is top 40 or an active genre such as new music, variety suffers, so even stations that claim to play anything in the United States get old after a while. I ended up with two solutions. Satellite radio balances a focused genre per channel with some variety, which works for radio, but it is not free. The other is iHeart, especially classic American Top 40, mostly for the 1980s broadcast. There are top 40 hits that I have never heard before, and it provides a good amount of randomness. I listen to a lot of music, so that works for me. I enjoy hearing Casey Kasem announce when a popular song first hit the chart and the interesting factoids he adds between songs. I admit there is a nostalgia factor for me, so it is probably not for everyone. Story 26. I trust disc jockeys who host radio shows more than any algorithm to provide me with good music. Story 27. The drive was too short to warrant plugging in my phone and choosing a station. Nothing good played during that 5-minute trip, and it was all commercials on the way back. Story 28. It is in my car, it is free, and I do not have to subscribe to it. Story 29. I usually listen to local radio in the morning to stay up to date with the community. Story 30. I want to hear great songs I have forgotten so I can add them to my playlist, and because it is more convenient when I am at work. Story 31. Real people on the radio telling me the news, funny stories, and information about the artists whose music they play. Story 32. The local radio hosts are entertaining and run contests and giveaways regularly. It is enjoyable to play along or get excited for the woman who won about $100,000 in cash and Taylor Swift concert tickets for guessing the sound. Story 33. It is free. It is easier to change channels during commercials. I like my local hosts. Story 34. It is somewhat nostalgic for me. It reminds me of riding in the car with my parents. It is comforting. Story 35. It's nice to trust a tastemaker you feel you know to pick your playlist, instead of an artificial intelligence algorithm judging you based on your searches. Story 36. I find National Public Radio soothing during my commute. Sometimes I tune amplitude modulation radio to conservative talk stations just to get my blood boiling. I like that old school radio still exists and is thriving. Story 37. I find most algorithms too regressive. They make my exposure increasingly insular, whereas a good radio station can surprise me. I want life to include positive surprises. When streaming, I often want to be in control, which is great when lounging but terrible when driving. Story 38. Nice background noise. It is free, and most of the non-radio music I listen to is free as well, which makes me laugh out loud. Comforting to hear when you are alone. Story 39. Independent radio is supported by listeners, free to listen, and a great way to discover new music without looking at your phone. Story 40. What is a streaming service? Radio is simple. It is on by default, and pressing one button changes the station. Story 41. I appreciate that someone curated the playlist, because I discover new music and enjoy what the hosts say. I also have a very old car. Story 42. I listen in the car most days during my 20-minute commute. On a longer drive, I listen to podcasts or audiobooks. Story 43. I don't have to mess around with figuring out what I want to listen to before driving. I just get in and go. Story 44. I like to be analog. I do not own a smartphone, and my car is very basic. Story 45. Local disc jockeys are more fun and relevant to my world, and the radio is free. Story 46. It offers a collective experience, live local human disc jockeys, and it is free. I love pulling up to a stoplight and finding the person next to me rocking out to the same song. Be excellent to each other. Story 47. To save $9.99 per month and avoid paying for extra data, the radio is fine. Story 48. When commuting to work, it is good to listen to the local radio morning show because they discuss local news, take call-ins, and run contests. Streaming does not offer that. Story 49. I don't really listen to the radio, but I'll be damned if I pay a monthly fee to listen to music. Story 50. I have never won anything from a streaming service, but I have won on the radio. Story 51. I receive better traffic updates, and I hear ads about buying diamond jewelry or getting a payday loan every 3 minutes. Story 52. I like music that is chosen by people instead of algorithms. Where I live, there are several good college radio stations I can put on when I am in the car. You can also stream stations from around the country live or from archives of recent shows. College radio is better than corporate radio or streaming services in many ways. There are no advertisements. Programs are interesting and push the boundaries of what you find on a formatted station or what a streaming service chooses based on your listening history. Disc jockeys sound like real people rather than the broadcast personalities on commercial stations. Story 53. I have Sirius XM satellite radio, but I still listen to local radio for community chat and traffic. Story 54. Entertainment in the car is mostly a variety of streaming options for whatever mood I am in at the moment. It is a little expensive. Story 55. I have always preferred radio to almost everything else. I am not a big music fan and rarely listen to it. I prefer talk radio and sports radio. I also know all the hosts on those stations because they have been on for a long time. I got hooked in the 1980s on Mark and Brian and Feinbaum and never stopped. I only listen to music, classic rock, because I am old, on Sundays when I pick my husband up from work because that is all that is on. Story 56. I like flipping the channels during the commercials. The songs are not interrupted by text messages or global positioning system alerts. Story 57. I rarely use my car. If I decide to take a short drive, it is more convenient to turn on the radio than to connect my phone. I also like to get local news on the fly. Story 58. I listen to Bloomberg Boston Radio every day to gain insights on the markets and the economy. It is very informative. Story 59. Sometimes it is nice to listen to an average person engage in conversations with radio hosts. It may be severely biased, but it provides a new perspective. Story 60. One switch and I don't feel like a clown asking a device to open applications or services for me. Story 61. I do not drive long distances, and I do not care enough about what I listen to for 15 minutes to choose a playlist. Story 62. I cannot even fathom using streaming services. Just download exactly the music you are interested in and never deal with networking issues. Story 63. The streaming service does not tell me about traffic updates and news. Story 64. I am poor and I am not paying for music during my 2 hours of commuting to work each day. Story 65. I love radio. I find Spotify okay the first few times, but then it plays songs I have already heard. There is not much new music for me. Disc jockeys play the same stuff and release radar is a bit hit or miss. Honestly, Bagel Radio is my main source of new music. Ted hosts a live show on Fridays from 9 to 5 United States Eastern Time, which airs here in Australia on Saturdays from 9 to 5. I just leave it on. Story 66. I use both. I tend to use streaming to listen to music I know and like or to try out music before purchasing physical media or concert tickets. I use radio to discover new music. Music curated by a human is preferable to music curated by an algorithm. Story 67. It powers on only when you switch it on and sometimes displays an advertisement. Story 68. Honestly, there are too many choices on streaming services. With the radio, I have my 5 stations preset and we roll. I do not have the time or inclination to search through them. Story 69. I am not bothered. The local alternative station is good and occasionally reports a local story or something happening. Story 70. There are already too many subscription services. I need to cut them back, not get another. Story 71. Sirius XM is expensive and barely plays music. The disc jockey has more time to talk, so it turns into a podcast just like on the radio. I also do not have unlimited data. Story 72. Only for local sports talk, and even then I am in misery. Story 73. I listen to my local student radio station for the authenticity. They make mistakes, say them all the time, clearly hate traffic reports, and I love every second of it. Everything tries to fit a branded package but comes off as a high school production. To top it off, it is a jazz station most college students could not care less about. I cannot overstate how fun 88.7 The Diamond is to listen to. Story 74. Why would I pay for something that is free? Paid services also have commercials, so I do not see any benefit in paying. Story 75. Variety is good. Also, advertisements on the radio are more local and relevant. The weeks before the election were a nightmare on Spotify. I probably encountered more Kamala Harris advertisements than songs. Story 76. Because it is free. I do not drive often, but when I do it is for 90 minutes or more. I need to listen to something, but Sirius XM satellite radio costs about $30 a month. If I drove 90 minutes every day, maybe that would be worth it. I also do not want to waste all of my mobile data streaming. If I can download audio to my phone, I will do that, but the radio is always available, easy, and free. Story 77. I am a native Seatlight, for better or worse. We have 3 larger community radio stations in the area, a couple smaller ones to the south, and a smattering of low-power frequency modulation radio stations as well. I like the radio because I am constantly hearing new and familiar music. There are so many knowledgeable disc jockeys who specialize in different genres. It has a much more diverse playlist than I could develop by myself. I also like to have the sound source separate from my computer audio. Throughout the week, I get to listen to surf, reggae, blues, punk, Celtic, folk, bluegrass, 1950s big band, old school country, 1980s club, and new wave electronic and metal. The only thing I really have to seek out is rockabilly. Story 78. Local news, weather, and traffic updates while driving. This probably isn't the type of answer you are looking for, though. Story 79. It is available for free, without the need to connect my phone to the car. Story 80. Nostalgia. There is literally a 1980s radio station in my area. I love it. Story 81. Streaming is so algorithm-based and self-confirming. I need some chaos. Story 82. I like the randomness of the music. It reminds me of old songs I haven't listened to in a long time. Story 83. I use streaming services now, but until a few months ago I listened to the radio for 2 reasons. First, my car does not have Apple CarPlay, and I could not be bothered to open the app and choose music before driving, so the radio was easier. Second, I am not very into music and do not want to create current playlists consistently, and listening to the radio keeps me up to date with popular music. Story 84. It is free and does not use any of my data bandwidth. I can change the radio station in my car by touch without taking my eyes off the road. In a rental car, I had to park to change the streaming station. Local news, especially traffic reports, can be useful even if I am using a mapping application. The application usually only knows my next destination, not my plans for the day, and cannot make complex decisions. Story 85. My car does not have Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, a compact disc player, or a tape player. I do not intend to upgrade this car. Story 86. The radio plays the same 20 shitty songs on loop. It's for people who are brain dead about music. Story 87. News, weather, and sports updates. You do not need an app for that. Story 88. A local indie station run by the university provides music and concert updates without any radio personality. Story 89. Only at work, because if I hook up a Bluetooth speaker, it will throw my algorithms off when I play music that is more appropriate for work. Most of my coworkers are 20 years older than I am, so they prefer classic rock. I like some classic rock, but it is not all I want to listen to. Story 90. I use it to find new music or music I already knew but did not know the name of. It is relatively successful for me in that regard. Story 91. If it's music, I don't want to hear the same songs or make a new playlist every day. I just want someone to play music for me. Story 92. I listen to Canadian Broadcasting Corporation music, formerly Radio 2. I leave it on as background music. It is ad-free, and their various shows rotate through many kinds of music without any input from me. There are occasional news breaks and announcers who tell stories about the next song or artist. Story 93, mostly because it is free, and I do not care enough about music to pay for a streaming service. It is just background noise while I am driving. There are also local news, sports talk, and announcements about local events. Local content is something that streaming services I have tried in the past lack. Story 94. If I am listening to the radio, it is because the Bluetooth in my car stereo has glitched, and will not let me connect to my phone until I stop and power it off. Story 95. I will have to speak for those who cannot be here and say that I do not use the internet at all, laughing out loud. Story 96. I have classical radio on for almost all of the day while I work from home. It is relaxing with no ads and minimal talking. The overall vibe supports work, relaxation, and hanging out, and I do not have to think about anything or use a device. Story 97. I'm a Scot living in London, and I listen to Radio Scotland for an hour each morning to hear the news. Story 98. I listen to Spotify, use Pandora, and subscribe to Sirius XM satellite radio, but I still sometimes listen to local radio. When I choose radio over on-demand programming, I usually do so to get outside my comfort zone of about 2,000 songs that tend to repeat too often on Spotify. Since I pay for Pandora, I do not hear advertisements. Sirius XM satellite radio has no advertisements on its music channels. Local radio does have advertisements, but there is one station I sometimes listen to that plays a wide variety of music I like. I also like to hear the disc jockeys comment before and after songs. Ultimately, it is all about choice, and the more options I have, the better. Story 99. I want to know what's new and experience the element of surprise. Spotify plays the same songs in the same order for me. Story 100. I love my local Australian Broadcasting Corporation Sydney radio station. The presenters are all fantastic. They present balanced views on the news and, more than that, make me feel connected to the Sydney community. Story 101. When it glitches or a call cuts off my song, it makes me irrationally angry. There are probably ways to fix it, but I do not have time. I am happy listening mostly to amplitude modulation sports radio. Story 102. Local radio carries the live sports station I like, and Spotify's streaming service receives it 4 hours later. Other streaming services do not carry it. Story 103. I do not want to increase my fixed payments. That is the main reason. There are many good stations in my area, so I do not miss anything, to be honest. Story 104. I only listen to it in the car during my half-hour commute because my car is old and does not have Bluetooth. Story 105. I listen to National Public Radio. A few weeks ago, the station was undergoing maintenance and operating in low power mode, which caused a lot of static. I streamed my local station using the National Public Radio app over Bluetooth. Story 106. I use the music choice channels on Verizon fiber optic service. Unfortunately, my hearing has worsened in recent years, so it is difficult to hear music on my phone anymore. Story 107. Sometimes it is fun, and I hear new things. Note: my radio is generally tuned to Canadian Broadcasting Corporation stations, which tend to have interesting long-form documentaries and more diverse non-commercial music than I would find on streaming services. I know those apps exist, but I do not want to spend hours hunting down and curating playlists, and I do not want to be offered the same 5 Beethoven pieces every time I want something orchestral. I also live in a place where reception disappears once you get more than 20 minutes out of town. Story 108. One of my former partners would just turn on any radio station, from oldies and pop to classical, although she hated country. I never understood it, especially since I'm very particular. This was back when Netflix still mailed digital versatile discs, and she would let them send her their recommendations. My God, we watched some terrible movies. I mentioned I read a lot of music biographies, so for Christmas she got me an 800-page book about Richard Nixon. What the heck? I hate politics, especially right-wing politics, but she would pick up pretty much anything and read it. Until I met her, I never realized some people could have no opinions about any kind of media. Story 109. There is a certain indescribable feeling of excitement when a song you like comes on while you were not expecting it. Story 110. English is not my first language. I grew up with my grandmother making bread in the early hours of the morning and listening to the radio. Being an independent woman at that time was complicated, so to earn extra money my grandmother used to sing on the radio in a way similar to how truck drivers communicate today. The music was traditional requested songs that were played on taxi radios in the 1980s. Radio will always be a part of my life. Story 111. Only in the car. Too much messing around with streaming. Story 112. I don't have a good data plan for streaming music apps, and Spotify increased its price even though I only listen to the same playlist. Story 113. It is not one or the other for me. I listen to music in a variety of formats depending on the context. I stream a lot, especially when I am working. Streaming is my primary way of discovering new artists and exploring new genres. I listen to the radio mainly when I am driving. For long drives, I sometimes stream an album, but for everyday driving, I prefer the radio because it keeps me connected to the stations and disc jockeys I have listened to for years and reminds me of songs I had forgotten. Local radio stations also help me learn about bands coming to town that I might want to see in concert. I also buy compact discs to support artists I love and for home listening, and I still use an MPEG Audio Layer 3 player for situations where a network signal may be unreliable, such as plane rides and hikes. Story 114. Because I don't have unlimited data yet, I'm stuck with an old plan and waiting until it's finished to switch to a new one. Story 115. Sometimes I turn on the television just to hear local commercials. I have Apple Music and have not heard an advertisement in a long time. The same is true with television streaming. All my services have no advertisements, so sometimes I tune to the local channels on a digital receiver and watch the local news or whatever program is on to hear a commercial. Story 116. I pay $10 per month for iHeartRadio All Access. It gives me live radio and on-demand content. I am a millennial who grew up with the radio, so the service is the best of both worlds. Story 117. I mostly stream my own music, but it is easy to get stuck in an echo chamber of the same songs ad nauseum. Many of the bands I have discovered recently came from the radio. I find I am less critical when I did not pick the song. If I pick it, I expect it to be good, and if I notice one thing I do not like, I skip it. I work at a car dealership and move through many different cars in a short time, so I am not going to add my phone to Bluetooth or Android Auto every time for a 15-minute drive. Sometimes I will, but I do not want to go to that trouble for a short trip. Satellite radio features many niche genre and era-based channels that allow them to play lesser-known music, aside from the typical classic rock stations that play the same songs. Story 118. And here I thought the original poster meant streaming, like Netflix, and I was wondering why on earth you would stream shows while driving. Story 119. I mostly listen to talk radio during my commute. Very few stations in my area play the music I like, and of those, almost none will play it without the disc jockey yammering on before and after every song. I listen to whatever on the radio catches my attention, and if nothing does, I use my music app. Story 120. I have a shop radio in the garage. I enjoy it because it plays music I do not usually listen to when I am in control. I like that it does not have a remote or Bluetooth. I can simply let it play and not worry about finding a song. Story 121. Ad-free. Almost non-stop good music with local and international news. What's not to like? It is also kind of the only thing to listen to in the car, and you can stream it to a headset, but there could be a bit more to choose from. Story 122. There's nothing like cricket on the radio on a car trip. Part of the joy is the kids complaining as they're indoctrinated to the point they'll inflict the same on their children. Story 123. Advertisements do not come out of nowhere. As long as you know that advertisements usually appear every half hour, you are fine. Story 124. My local area has a great morning radio show that I listen to daily on my commute to work. I end up listening to the rest of the show when they upload it to Spotify, so I guess I do both. Story 125. I mostly listen in my car just because it is easier. Also, when I travel, I like to listen to a portable radio, since sometimes I hear new songs from that country. Story 126. It doesn't provide local news. It also helps me not feel so alone in my home office. Story 127. I listen to new things because I like to be surprised sometimes. Story 128. I do not listen to commercial radio for the most part, but I like some listener-supported university stations, especially WXPN Radio and WFUV Radio. I listen to them at work. The rest of the time I listen to streaming services, mostly Apple Music because I have a subscription, or the free version of Spotify. Story 129. Honestly, if you are just listening to the top 100 of any genre, it is not that different. Depending on the station, you may hear some new songs or local news between every few songs, which is nice, especially if you do not follow the local Facebook groups and so on. Story 130. Locally, we have a music station run by National Public Radio in the adult album alternative format, which is a broad mix, and a college-run indie station. Both are commercial-free and play many local artists. Story 131. There is a jazz radio station I really like because it features music that would never be suggested to me by Spotify. It also has several informative segments I enjoy, plus great live sets. Story 132. Because it is live and I feel connected. We are slowly being disconnected, you see. Story 133. I am in Canada and I like the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. One of my favorite programs airs on Sundays. It is called In Concert and broadcasts from Vancouver from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. The host is Paolo Pietropalo. He is a lively, enthusiastic presenter who explores new and classical music, highlights forgotten composers who deserved better, and includes portions of live concerts from around the world. Story 134. I mix radio and streaming depending on my mood. I like not choosing the music because it exposes me to more styles and artists, which I can then search on Spotify to find more of their music. Story 135. I am 56 years old and I still listen to college radio because it is the only place I can hear new music I might like. I do not want algorithmic suggestions that say you like one thing so you will probably like another. I often enjoy music that bears no relation to my other favorites. Story 136. For erectile dysfunction medication, the low testosterone clinic, and funeral planning commercials. Classic rock radio rules. Story 137. It's less than a 10-minute drive to work, so I can't be bothered. It also lines up with the morning news and weather, which is nice. Story 138. The stereo at my job was made in 1986. Frequency modulation still works great, and I have some nice jazz, classical, and rock stations nearby. Story 139. There's something about listening to a baseball game on amplitude modulation radio that just hits. Plus, it's somehow still free. Honestly, it's probably the lack of constant advertisements everywhere since I'm using my ears and not my eyes. I get that there are commercial breaks on radio, and I'm okay with that because at least it's not constant and everywhere, like on stadium sideboards, on players' uniforms and helmets, on the pitcher's mound, or every few seconds putting the game in picture-in-picture to show even more advertisements between the normal commercial breaks. Nope. Just the sound of the crowd, our radio announcer calling play-by-play, and the occasional whack of the bat, without an obscene level of corporate advertising assaulting every sense every few seconds. Story 140. I enjoy not having to be my own disc jockey. Traffic updates are essential, and I don't get those on Spotify. Story 141. I can drain a device's battery while keeping my phone's battery intact. I get very excited when a song I know or like comes on the radio, because the music I listen to on streaming services is rarely played on the radio. Story 142. When I bought my Jeep a couple of months before the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, I had a free trial of Sirius XM satellite radio. We traveled to many national parks in several states and crossed the border to Mexico's wine country. The radio was crystal clear with great disc jockeys. It offered everything I like about radio without commercials, and the same channel played no matter where I drove. I have a Spotify account, so when I hear new music, I add it to my playlist and listen on demand. Story 143. I keep a radio on all the time in one of the rooms. I had a dog that was calmer and more relaxed when it was playing. He is long gone, but the radio is still on. My current dog couldn't care less. Story 144. Win tickets and giveaways while most people listen to streaming services. Story 145. I listen to streaming radio. It is free and plays the music I like. I get nostalgic and listen to music from my hometown and the surrounding area, or music from my primary and secondary school years. Story 146. I just like the radio. I am in the United Kingdom and listen to the British Broadcasting Corporation Radio 4 when driving. It is rarely boring and often features topics you did not know were interesting. Story 147. My car is a 2011 Toyota Camry. It has a radio, a broken compact disc player, and a finicky auxiliary port. The only reliable source of sound in my car is the frequency modulation radio. Story 148. My kid does not have a smartphone, so he can turn it on in his room by himself. Story 149. I enjoy listening to live radio talk shows and many pre-recorded podcasts. Story 150. It is free and fun. I call all the time and have won tickets to concerts. Story 151. It is mostly local news and more entertaining when I am driving. I mainly listen to podcast documentaries and want to pay attention to them, so I listen while cooking or when I go to sleep. Story 152. Sometimes I like hearing what is new these days, and every once in a while they play a hit from the 2000s that reminds me of my childhood. It hits 50 times harder when a song you love randomly comes on. I do not always want to choose what I hear. I would prefer it to be somewhat random. Story 153. My playlist can get boring when I hear the same songs repeatedly, even though it is quite long. I do a lot of driving for work and could connect my phone via Bluetooth, but I choose to listen to the radio instead. Story 154. My car and stereo are ancient, and I cannot be bothered to do anything about it. Story 155. 1. Free. 2. Does not collect data. 3. Exposes me to local news and events. 4. Does not rely on an algorithm, so I hear things I might not otherwise hear. Story 156. Live sports. I'm convinced the best way to experience a baseball game is in person or on the radio. Story 157. We have a legendary radio station here that has been on the air for 70 years. When I use streaming, it seems I hear the same 30 songs repeatedly no matter how much I try to change the playlist. Story 158. I like the idea of what radio once was. A curated assortment of music picked by a DJ, but now it's mostly about profiteering, except for some late-night and college stations. Story 159. Because I refuse to pay for yet another subscription service. Story 160. My car is 20 years old. For my normal commute to work and back, it is not worth setting up equipment to run my phone through the stereo, so I listen to the radio. I stream audio only when driving out of town. Story 161. Preparing and eating breakfast with the family, while the radio runs in the background, has a very different atmosphere than Spotify. Spotify is for when I am wearing headphones. Story 162. The main reason is it is free. There are also a couple of decent local radio stations that I consistently listen to. Story 163. I listen to both. Sometimes I want to hear whatever they choose to play. Other times I prefer an album or one of my playlists. Story 164. I do both. In my barn, I can just hit the power button and the local station comes on. The music is okay and I hear local news, weather, and so on. There is some morning show banter that is not very annoying. I am also set up for streaming. While driving, I am always streaming something. Story 165. I have a 4-minute commute. It is not worth paying for something I will not even be able to use. Story 166. My alarm clock is over 30 years old and has a built-in radio. It wakes me up every day and still works. Story 167. I do both, but I prefer live performances because there is something about them compared with edited shows. Story 168. I stick to local radio stations I know and enjoy. I only listen to the radio while driving. Story 169. During my morning commute, we listen to a local radio station because there is a trivia game we enjoy. Story 170. All the rock radio stations in Boston are gone. It is terrible because most of the rock music they play is more than 10 years old. Just play songs from current artists and albums 2 times an hour or so. That would make everything better. I know this is not a solution, but I prefer radio over streaming if we at least had local representation. I miss having my station represented at local concerts. Story 171. I am in Canada, so I cannot get my news on social media. I use streaming services instead of cable. If I did not listen to the radio, I would have no clue about current events. Story 172. Internet radio is where it's at. All high-definition streams are curated by true music lovers. There are very few advertisements. Paste the web address into your favorite music player and enjoy. It's a game changer. Story 173. It is free, and I do not pay for unlimited data. There are also some cool stations around here that play music I would never find on my own. Story 174. It is free. Great local stations. I am in the car less than 3 hours a week. Story 175. I only listen to the radio in the car and not all the time. There are a few really good radio stations where I live. The ads are far less annoying than the ones I hear online, probably because they are not focused on virality. Story 176. I could not be bothered to connect my phone to my car all the time. Story 177. Music selected by humans is better than algorithmic playlists. Story 178. If there is a station you like, there is no reason not to listen. Just tune in and enjoy the music. My favorite station also has decent talk shows. I only listen to music on the radio when driving and on my computer via YouTube. On occasion I use internet radio. There is nothing a streaming service can offer that I do not already get, and streaming services are inundated with ads, so they offer no clear benefit over radio. Story 179. I usually listen because it is already playing. Most work sites and businesses I visit have it on in the background. People get annoyed when someone plays their own music because of different tastes, message alerts, and phone calls. At home, in my earbuds, and in my car I use Spotify or Audible. The local news and events are also good. Story 180. Decision fatigue. Hearing new music or old music I might not have thought to look for. Story 181. It's just easier. I don't have to connect my phone, decide what I want to listen to, open an app, find it and press play. That's a lot of work when my longest drives by far are to and from work. It's either too early for all that, or I just want to get home. Story 182. Sometimes, if my phone is acting up or I have decision fatigue, I will put National Public Radio on. There are few commercials and it offers local news and easy listening. Story 183. I live in Colorado, where we have 2 solid, commercial-free radio stations. It's nice not to have to worry about finding something to listen to when you get in the car. The stations are Indy 102.3 and 105.5 the Colorado Sound. Story 184. I listen to my local news radio station in the mornings while getting ready for work. Their schedule on weekdays is very predictable, so I can time my mornings to it perfectly. I also like to know what is happening locally in news and entertainment. Outside of that, I use streaming services, mainly the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation Radio 3 playlist, which is free, and Wave Radio in Houston, which is free but accepts donations. Not much else interests me. Story 185. Local news, and sometimes I do not want to think about my phone. Story 186. I dislike online media for local news and don't watch television anymore. I still listen to Canadian Broadcasting Corporation Radio in my car. It is my source for local news. Story 187. I love the local radio station. I listen every day on my way to work. Story 188. I already own a car radio. I receive local traffic reports and news, which help me stay in touch with what is happening in my community. Story 189. One of my local radio stations plays lesser-known artists, so I hear them before they blow up and note their names to look up later. Story 190. Our local stations give away a lot of free stuff. We go to concerts, theme parks, and local events all the time for free, although we pay taxes on the winnings. I do not think stations in other cities give out as much. Story 191. I no longer listen to music radio here in the United Kingdom. It is dreadful. There are even longer and louder advertising breaks and too much mindless talk from radio presenters and their colleagues, all trying to create a fake humorous vibe. Story 192. I'm never driving long enough to take the time to turn my phone on. We have a small radio in our kitchen and leave it tuned to National Public Radio. It is very convenient to turn on when you are unloading the dishwasher. Story 193. Local content. Hosts, news, community announcements and public service announcements, local and regional artists, and so on. Additionally, Sirius XM satellite radio has a serious dearth of Texas Red Dirt music. Story 194. There is not much local, current news streaming available. I know there are radio station applications, but why use bandwidth when over-the-air radio is free? Not all the places I drive have cellular service. Story 195. I listen to my local sports radio. It is what I have used for decades while working. Story 196. I listen to the radio in the car because it is easier than using playlists and mobile data, and I only have the free Spotify plan. Story 197. A few years ago, I started listening to classical radio. There are no ads because it is on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and it is just nice background music. Most of the pieces I hear are new to me or I have not heard them in full. Story 198. It is clunky to plug an auxiliary cable into the car. There is no Bluetooth. If the drive is longer than 20 minutes, I will plug in my phone. Otherwise, I use the radio, which is not great, but I deal with it. Story 199. First, my car is old and it is difficult to sync with my phone. Outside my car, I do not really listen to music. I do not want to pay for a streaming service. I also enjoy my local morning radio show and pop music. At my age, it is the only way I know what is current. Story 200. I do not have unlimited data and do not want to pay for ad-free streaming. Story 201. Local Wisconsin University radio stations are excellent and provide local content, bands, and news. I also stream great stations from other states, for example the KEXP radio station from Seattle. Story 202. I listen to it at work. The music is mostly not something I would choose myself, but it is good in the background. It is just the regular commercial music. The radio hosts have funny programs, and it keeps me up to date with the news. I do not listen to stations that have commercials, mostly because they play the same playlist and I sometimes hear the same song 3 to 4 times during an 8-hour shift. I listen to a very large amount of music, an unhealthy amount. I have many playlists sorted by genre, and some playlists contain around 80 hours or more of music. At work, I rarely choose any of my playlists. Radio is easier. I sometimes use Spotify Radio to find new music, but it mostly shows songs and tracks I already know. Story 203. When I was a child, my parents divorced. I was the first in my grade with divorced parents, and my mother had to work 2 jobs. We were home alone until 11 p.m., and I kept the radio on. It was the 1970s, and disc jockeys were local people who chose their own music. They kept me from feeling scared and lonely. I have always listened to the radio to connect with my city. I moved 1,900 miles for a new job during the pandemic shutdown, and listening to local radio helped me learn about my new home. Disc jockeys are more annoying now, and the music is pre-programmed, but it is still a bit of human connection. Story 204. When I get in my truck, I do not have to press 6 buttons to find music I like. I start it and the music is already playing. Story 205. Not being in control of everything is completely freeing. There is no skip button. Songs you like become more enjoyable, and sometimes talk radio is exactly what you need. Story 206. I do not want to pay for services and I do not like listening to their ads. The sound balance between the ads and the music is poor. It is easier to change stations in my work truck, and doing so is not illegal, unlike changing stations on my phone while driving. I also really like listening to my local national public radio station because it has a great mix of local, national, and world news. National Public Radio is a much more balanced news outlet than almost anything else we have, and they are careful to disclose potential conflicts of interest when a sponsor is involved. Story 207. I use Spotify when I really want to hear something specific, but otherwise I like to hear the local news snippets in between songs. Story 208. I love the morning radio show where I live, so I listen to it. Otherwise, I listen to podcasts while I work. One podcast I enjoy is a morning show from another state. Story 209. In the car, I am usually listening to National Public Radio. It is free brain food. Story 210. I always think of the young girl in England who was asked why she preferred radio to television. Her answer was, "The scenery is better." Story 211. You don't have to pay for music streaming services if you own an Android phone. Many premium services are free if you know how to get them. I started listening to many classic rock and pop songs using a well-known cracked app. Story 212. My radio works in places where my mobile connection does not. Story 213. I don't want to deal with phone pairing and nonsense. I just want to get in and go. Story 214. I like the morning show the station airs, but I do not like connecting my phone with a bunch of wires to listen in my vehicle. I do, however, use Spotify at work because I am in a metal box with no radio pickup. Story 215. I had satellite radio for a few years. I realized it was just a loop of the same songs if you listen to the channels. I live near Chicago, and the radio station WXRT plays both new and old music. It is nice to hear the disc jockeys again. I am lively even at 50. There is something nice about the way it used to be and the greater variety. Story 216. I listen to Sirius XM satellite radio because it costs $6 per month for me right now. I am too lazy to look for new music on Spotify, and it has a good variety. Story 217. Living in an area of Sydney, Australia, with excellent independent and community radio as well as the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, I try to listen to radio in the mornings with my kids and in the car. I get more interesting curated music than from streaming service algorithms. I learn about the music through presenter conversations, and I love the real-time nature of those conversations. Even when streaming, I often listen to online stations. I work in music and listen to a lot of music. I believe there is a genuine market and non-market need for one-to-many live radio with curated shows, a cultural need and a real connection to community. Stations do more than broadcast. They present live music shows, engage with communities at fairs, work with music studios and independent labels, and create an ecosystem where new, emerging, and independent artists can find an audience. Story 218. I spend all day in a work truck, and streaming would wreck my data usage. Story 219. I love the radio. No algorithm can beat music presented by people who are truly passionate about sound. I am lucky enough to have British Broadcasting Corporation Radio 6. If that is not what I am in the mood for, there is Radio 1, Radio 2, Radio 3, or Radio 4. I also use Spotify when I know what I want to listen to. Story 220. I only listen to it while driving because Bluetooth can be very frustrating, especially in older vehicles. Story 221. I really like Sirius XM satellite radio. I discover a lot of new music through it that I would not hear otherwise. Spotify curates music to my tastes, while Sirius XM satellite radio exposes me to music I would not choose myself. Story 222. I stream some things I like, but I listen to the radio for the same reason people explore new places. I cannot control what comes on, and I often learn new things. I mostly listen to local national public radio stations and their sister music stations. That exposes me to music and topics I would not otherwise encounter. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.